So our next session is going to be moderated by Dr. Scott Pincikowski from Hood College. He is a professor of German and chair of the Department of Global Languages and Literatures. He's also taught introductory environmental humanities courses focusing on climate change. And I'm just going to add a personal comment here. Long ago when I was in college, I majored in English and environmental studies. So I'm thrilled to see that Hood has, and Dr. Pincikowski has, come up with a concept of an environmental humanities program. I just think that's super important and emphasizes the fact that environmental issues, climate issues, are kind of all-encompassing. They don't just have to live in the biology department or geology or something like that. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Pincikowski for the Environmental Justice Panel. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Karen, for that wonderful introduction. It's really my honor and privilege to facilitate this session this morning. We heard from Dr. Lamb and Jamie DeMarco about environmental justice issues. When we think about the impacts of climate change, there are certain communities that are going to bear the burdens of the crisis as it develops. So even as we green our infrastructure, who's going to benefit from that? We want to make sure that this happens equitably and that we're all sharing the burden of the climate crisis. And the two speakers that are going to be talking about environmental justice with us, they're both amazing individuals doing incredible work in our community. Lauren Paulet is the Sustainability Outreach Coordinator of the City of Frederick. And she really strives to create an impactful, culturally sensitive programs dealing with affected communities. And she's interviewed individuals afflicted by wildfires, flooding, sewage backups, and industrial pollution incidences. And she and her partner in crime, if you want to call that, Tiara Lester, who is the Sustainability Program Administrator for Frederick County's Division of Energy and Environment. They're going to be talking about some of the initiatives that they're working on in our community. And Tiara is the Sustainability Program Administrator for our county, and she oversees a great number of initiatives such as the Green Homes and Community Navigator programs. And they're going to talk to us, like I said, about the initiatives, how we all can be working better to be inclusive as we adapt and become more resilient to climate change. So with no further ado, I'd like you to welcome our two speakers, and hopefully we'll have a very productive discussion. Hi.
Hey there. How's everyone doing? I'm Lauren, by the way.
I'm Tiara.
And first off, I know you guys have probably been sitting down for a little while, so we kind of want to encourage you to just please stand up, look around, stretch, and introduce yourself to someone nearby that you don't know, even if it's just making weird eye contact.
Yeah. A nod, a smile, a wave. Get to know your neighbors. I love it. Killing it.
Oh, yes.
Hello, pleasure. Nice to meet you, Lauren. You're doing a fantastic job.
You too. And you can, I guess.
Yeah, I'll hit next. Oh,
Okay.
no, I can say this. I can say
Yeah.
that. And then I'll hit
Make a mental note of who you just met, so you could talk to them later, too.
Oh, everybody's talking. Yes. I love this. I love it. Maybe I should have one mic. Yeah. Okay.
I can go get one.
Well, hopefully you've connected with someone new.
Alrighty. All right, cool. So, hopefully you've met someone new. Make a mental note to talk to them later. Now that you have all introduced yourselves, we're going to introduce each other. So, I'll start. This is Tiara. She is a powerhouse outreach person working at the Frederick County Division of Energy and the Environment. I am so pleased to call her my friend, and she's kind of like one of my only real coworkers, even though we don't technically work for the same place.
And this lovely individual here is Lauren. She works with the City of Frederick in the Sustainability Office. She is a communications guru and is queen of outreach. And I'm pleased to always work and especially collaborate on this amazing presentation to show and talk with you guys a little bit more about something near and dear to our hearts.
Yes, and we thought it was really important that we actually craft this presentation together, particularly because the county and the city collaborate extensively on programs, outreach, education, and implementation of different initiatives. And so we're here to just share some learnings and everyday best practices for climate justice and environmental justice in your work and life.
So to kick it off, what is environmental justice? We've heard about it in our previous presentations before us, but according to EPA, it's formally defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of color, race, national origin, income, and with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, policies, and regulations. With fair treatment, meaning that no population bears a disproportionate share of negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, municipal, and commercial operations, or from the execution of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and policies. And I want to pick out meaningful involvement is really key here because it's understanding to mean the requirement of effective access to decision makers for all and the ability in all communities to make informed decisions and take positive actions to produce environmental justice for themselves. So what does all of those words mean, right? It means that environmental justice is for everyone, regardless of how you look, where you came from, or how much you make. That should not determine if you can receive the same environmental protection and benefits as someone else. Environmental justice is, at its core, a public health and human rights movement, one that calls to action to address environmental racism and other oppressive systems and injustices, and was born from decades of advocacy through community mobilization, the civil rights movement, and environmentalism.
So what does it look like? Hopefully this is not really news to you, but environmental justice looks like access to clean water, clean air, leisure and recreation in nature. That's a big one that we're going to talk about a little bit later on too. Benefits of climate mitigation, access to renewable energy options, and also access to public transportation so they can get around to all the lovely environmental green spaces that they hopefully have in their area.
But it's important to acknowledge injustices nationwide. Discrimination and racism in the U.S., such as redlining, forced migrations, and economic segregation, have had detrimental and profound effects on human settlement patterns and on protections for the nation's remaining natural areas. People of color have been and continue to be the subject of violence, intimidation, and threats while in nature and experiencing nature. For example, in May of 2020, a black man by the name of Christian Cooper, who was bird watching, was involved in an argument with a white individual named Amy Cooper about her dog free roaming, and he asked her to leash the dog and attempted to give the dog treats. Amy Cooper called the police and stated, "There is an African-American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. Please send the cops immediately." For purely asking her to leash her dog, mind you that. So let this story serve as an example of the fact that our nation still has some work to be done when it comes to racism, discrimination, and equity.
And we talked a little bit about what environmental justice looks like. And now here's what injustice looks like. It can take many different forms. Nature deprivation is one of them. So people of color and low-income communities are far more likely than their white counterparts to live in a place that is deprived of the benefits of nature, including nearby places that allow them to get outside safely and access clean air, clean water, and a diversity of wildlife. How can we solve this? Well, creating more close-to-home outdoor opportunities in communities of color is key in kind of addressing that disparity. Food insecurity is another one. This can look as limited or uncertain access to food, and specifically healthy food options in a community. Different municipalities will define it in different ways, but one metric that's usually used to quantify this is how far someone resides from a grocery store. The urban heat island effect is another one that's popular today. I think it's been mentioned quite a few times. Why does this happen? Well, because in urban areas we have so many paved structures and impervious surfaces. You kind of have to think of it as like our sidewalks, our roads, our bridges are all part of our built environment. And our natural areas like our parks, our tree canopy cover, and stream buffers are the green infrastructure that help mitigate the effects of climate change. Our studies with Hood College have shown that there is a daytime urban heat island effect in Frederick, with some temperatures being as high as 12.7 degrees Fahrenheit in urban areas compared with rural control areas. And that's looking at like, the hottest day and the hottest summer and the hottest month. And then we have disproportionate exposures to pollution and hazards. No one should have to live their life in a constant state of worry that they're going to be exposed to, poor water or air quality. In my work in Baltimore, I've met folks that are dealing with sewage backups because of aging infrastructure in divested communities. Like the previous speaker noted, there's the Bresco facility that subjects a lot of communities in South Baltimore to poor air quality as well. And a few years back, as a part of a field studies course, I went out to the Ute Reservation in Colorado and met with tribal members who lived near radioactive uranium tailings that were dumped on their land for decades. And gross incidences of this happen all over the country. And it's the duty of sustainability professionals to actively monitor and address these kinds of inequities. Higher energy costs, this one's sort of like indirect in a way because this might hit home to you, right? Energy costs keeps rising every year. And when your home or rental property is not like properly weatherized, those inefficiencies add up and there's a true cost there. This is particularly detrimental for our asset-limited, income-constrained, employed or ALICE communities who are already facing financial insecurity. And lastly, all of these things kind of add up to worsened mental and physical health outcomes as well. I have a question for all of you. How many of you think that these each suck? That these suck, that these things that we have to deal with, these challenges kind of suck. Yeah, I think we can all agree that they're not great. And the worst part is that they're not like mutually exclusive. So typically communities are facing 2 or more of these at once. And so it just adds to that challenge. And when I was working in Baltimore, I interviewed and shared the story of this one neighborhood in Southwest Baltimore that was physically cut off by their local stream. They had like some informal trails they would use to, visit and experience nature with their families. But they were physically cut off from this by an illegally dumped mountain of dirt, sediment, and trash. And their community was also in a food desert as well. And that kind of just shows that like typically multiple of these are happening at once. But now Tiara's going to talk a little bit more about the history of racial injustice in Frederick County specifically.
So philosopher George Santayana once said, and I think we all have heard this, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And similar to the rest of the United States, our history here in Frederick is composed of both racial inequities and a slow transition towards to a more inclusive and equitable living area. Some of these racial inequities are presented here. So starting from 1904, Maryland passed the Jim Crow laws for separate compartments on train and steamboats. Then we're going to jump a little to 1968. There was a pretty widespread and prevalent mistreatment of Black people, And the NAACP boycotted Frederick businesses that supported Wallace for presidency at that time. Then we come to 1971, where there was, unfortunately, discriminatory hiring at Frederick County government. Then between the years of 1980 and 1984, the Ku Klux Klan, also known as the KKK, held 6 rallies throughout Frederick. And then more recently, in 2015, after the death of Freddie Gray in police custody, Frederick County sent officers over to help quell the violence. And then in 2020, George Floyd was murdered, and there were several demonstrations held throughout Frederick. But there has also, as I mentioned, been a slow fight towards equity and justice. Starting in 1969, the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce and NAACP opened the People's Opportunity and Information Center. Then in 1971, Frederick County signed an agreement with HUD to end racial bias in government housing and employment. And then we go to 1993, where the city of Frederick settled a discrimination lawsuit by agreeing to hire black officers equal to the population share. And then more recently, in 2020, the youth sponsored the March for Justice rally in Frederick, and Frederick County government contributed $50,000 to launch the African American Resources Cultural and Heritage Society, also known as ARCH. And then in 2023, the county government, we completed their employee survey on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and began implementing its DEIB strategic workforce plan.
So now to get to some of the meat of the conversation too. Here are some best practices for environmental justice. The first one that comes to mind is self-education, right? We each have a responsibility to educate ourselves on the links between systemic and structural racism and the disproportionate environmental hazards that are found in unprivileged communities. And what does self-education look like? Well, it's keeping up with the latest research, attending sessions like this, and if you're a student and you're enrolling in a class, you might want to choose a class that's focused on environmental justice or general inequities in our societal systems. Collaboration is a big one, especially if you are a nonprofit or a municipality. Collaboration is something that's important, especially early on. And so it's important to form genuine interpersonal connections with advocates in your community and support them however you can. Again, in those early stages of planning an initiative, not later on once everything is drafted and your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. Data-driven initiatives. Data's the real magic behind impact. There's so many EJ tools out there to determine and find out what your environmental, equity emphasis areas are so that you can better target where your time and your resources go so that you are making the biggest impact in your communities. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we go into our case studies. Leveraging platforms for good. What does this look like? Social media. I'm sure everyone here has, well, maybe, I don't know, not everyone has social media, but your organization probably does have a social media platform, and social media is such a powerful tool for educating, informing, and sharing stories and resources. Earlier I mentioned about that one community in Baltimore that had the dirt mountain. Well, I actually went out and spoke with one of the neighbors that was affected by this pollution event. And I just brought my cell phone. I recorded them talking about how they were affected. I probably recorded like an hour worth of footage. I took a 15-second snippet from that conversation and posted it on social media. And within 10 minutes, 30,000 people had seen it. And so oftentimes it's about finding that story, finding that impactful quote that you can post to kind of introduce people to a story. And hopefully people were able to get more informed about this and then contribute to some of the efforts that were being held to resolve the dirt mountain incident. But I hope that just goes to show that social media, when used properly, is really great, even if it's a double-edged sword sometimes. Accountability is kind of the last one. This one's so important. We have to call each other out when things are not being done right. or when we're not always looking at stuff with that equity lens. And so what's wonderful about the collaboration that we have here between the city and the county is that we can hold each other accountable so that we can better serve our constituents in all walks of life. You know, some people think that the county and the city are the same. That's kind of our biggest conundrum working in government. And so, I mean, it's a little confusing. We have similar programs, and ultimately, at the end of the day, it's Tiara and my roles to help navigate everyone where they need to go. If someone from the county comes to me and they need resources from this, you know, the county, I'm going to forward them on to Tiara or someone else and make sure that they get connected with who they need to get connected to. So really acting as a navigator is important regardless of where you stand in the system.
We are gonna try and get you guys in on our case studies really quick. I know we're a little over time, but we really wanted to show you guys how what we're doing between the city and the county in terms of programs and initiatives, and really integrating environmental justice into those, and to include, you know, the fair treatment of all, the meaningful inclusion of all folks, and then making sure individuals have access and connection to the same benefits and protections.
I'll go quick. Energy Fair was something that we planned together at Waverly Elementary School. What were we trying to achieve? Well, we wanted to inform and encourage residents to subscribe to community solar and increase their access to renewable energy. Our audience was, you know, our Alice community, and a community that was largely composed of renters as opposed to homeowners. Some of our challenges were language barriers and childcare. So how did we tackle this? Well, Tiara and I got together. We met with the Waverly Elementary School family engagement specialist and their Judy Center staff, and really just honed in on providing a program that was informative and culturally relevant. We translated every single presentation that we had offered that evening, and we even had interpreters on site translating in real time. And on top of all this, we had in tandem an activity with like a little magician doing a like environmental bit in another room to help the parents seriously focus on the information at hand and not have to worry about childcare. And so that was one cool thing we did last fall.
Okay, so what is this? This right here is a reading from during the summer of 2023. It is an air quality reading when the Canadian wildfire smoke blanketed our region, and the air quality index was 162, and it was red. This was one of the highest pollutant air that this region has seen, and it was deemed unhealthy for all of us during that time, which prompted our air quality monitoring network project. This project essentially we wanted to observe what the air quality was using real-time data and looking at particulate matter 2.5, which are size molecules that we can breathe in. It can infiltrate our blood, and it can impact our heart and lungs. And we wanted to make sure that individuals across the area, and specifically within communities that are known to have hazards that impact their air quality, that we were monitoring those and focusing on those regions to address any concerns in collaboration with the state of Maryland, while also empowering and allowing an education opportunity for individuals to learn more about air quality, to be able to make informed decisions on their own outdoor activity.
Again, it's all about connection, right? Nature connects us all. That's why we started our conversation, having you all connect with somebody new. And so I hope that this presentation offered you a different perspective. Maybe you learned something new that you can chat with your new friend on your way to lunch today. Keep the conversation going about environmental justice. It's really important, and it's not the kind of thing that can be accomplished with one single action. It's the type of thing that has to be integrated into your kind of everyday practices, and so that you're just make sure you're always trying to have that equity lens as you go about implementing different initiatives for advancing sustainability. So, yep. Any questions?
My mic on? Yeah, there we go. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation on such an important topic. I had some questions, but I see we have questions in the audience, so I'd actually like to go directly there.
So my name is Faith Clarish. I chair the Sustainability Commission here in the county, and I know just how passionate and hard Tiara works on these issues. So, she's doing it every day and keeping all these principles in mind. But I do want to make sure that we don't lose sight when we talk about environmental justice, that it's a socioeconomic issue as well. Okay, so yes, there's structural racism, and we absolutely have to address that. But I'm here, standing here, telling you that I grew up not surrounded by nature, over a store in a road that was not unlike Rockville Pike. I played in an alley where people threw their junk, okay, so it wasn't safe. And one day, there wasn't even a park I could walk to. There wasn't even a tree I could climb. And one day, a storekeeper gave me a small bag of seeds to grow string beans, okay? And said, find a little patch of brown soil in that alley and try to grow them. And every adult around me discouraged me from doing that. It's never gonna grow. It's just sand, whatever. And I did it. And I nurtured those little seeds. And I'm telling you, that's why I'm standing here today. Because that, and to tell you the truth, when those string beans happened, I was so young, I didn't even realize that was something I could eat, right? Someone had to tell me, Faith, you can take them off and you can eat those for dinner, you know? So I'm just trying to explain that when you're poor and you're isolated and you have no reach out to nature, all these things that Tiara and Lauren have talked about are so incredibly important. I know it because it was my own experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith.
Thanks for sharing.
Hi, I have a question. So I research Indigenous environmental injustice and community resilience. I know that Maryland doesn't have any federally recognized tribes, but there are multiple state recognized tribes. So I'm curious, what is Frederick County doing to advance, I don't know, the voices of Indigenous communities, official or unofficially organized, land back measures, getting them rights to hunting and fishing, all of those things? Is that happening? Is outreach happening, or collaboration with those groups?
Thank you for your question. So I will say that in 2023, we, myself and others in the Division of Energy and Environment, initiated conversations with our Indigenous populations in our areas to start those conversations. And I would say the number one barrier in those conversations was trust. And trust takes time to rebuild in order to make those changes. But I will say that we are working to rebuild that trust and collaborate with Indigenous tribes and populations to achieve those.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bill Steigelman. I'm also on the County Sustainability Commission with Faith, and of course know Tiara. I want to thank Lauren and Tiara for bringing this important subject to the conference. My first exposure to environmental justice issue was fairly recent. I read a filing bringing suit against the government in connection with the proposals to widen the the beltway around DC and up I-270. They were filing this lawsuit on the basis that environmental justice was not adequately treated in the proposal. And they brought out several examples, and if we all just think about where elevated trains run, buses in congested areas, new highways that disrupt people, who are the people who get disrupted in the homes that get torn down to make new highways in urban areas? So just think about who are the victims. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
So I see that unfortunately we're at time, but we're also, I think the lunch break is starting. So I hope that this conversation can continue, and certainly Lauren and Tiara will be around, and if your organization can intersect with what they're doing, so connecting, right? There's a lot of work to be done in this area. So thank you again, Lauren. Thank you, Tiara.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.